So what if the meaning of life, what if it isn't actually about being, but becoming?
Ah, that's a big question to start with.
Right. I mean, think about it for a second. We spend so much of our time trying to figure out who we are, trying to just plant a flag in this static identity.
Yeah, we want a fixed label.
Exactly. But what if the clues to our ultimate truth suggest that existence is actually this constant flowing transformation? And what if those clues are just hidden right in front of us, like tucked away in ancient alphabets, or the geological makeup of a Mediterranean island, or even, the acoustic echoes of a rock-cut chapel in Armenia?
I mean, it completely upends how we look at history, doesn't it?
It really does. And that's the mission for today's deep dive. We're exploring this profound set of notes on ancient linguistics and mysticism. We want to see how these historical clues apply to your modern life today.
Because when we dive into these texts, we start to see that our ancestors, they didn't view reality as a series of fixed objects. They saw this massive interconnected process. And the incredible thing is that they encoded the map of that process into the very words they spoke.
Yeah, I was looking through these notes, and it points to this wild idea that humanity used to share a single spiritual DNA. So let's unpack this. Imagine humanity is like a torn tapestry.
That's a good visual.
Thanks. So we have all these disconnected threads of culture, specifically the ancient houses of Japheth and Shem, which, was the old way of describing the two major branches of post-Diluvian humanity. And the research suggests we actually have the original thread meant to stitch them back together.
Yeah, that historical kinship between the Armenian and Hebrew linguistic roots is just fascinating. We're looking at a profound effort to reunite those brothers, Shem and Japheth.
Right.
And the clearest place to see this attempt at reunification, it isn't in a treaty or some massive monument. It's actually in a single, incredibly common name.
Hovhannes, which is the Armenian equivalent of John. I mean, I know a dozen people named John or Hovhannes. So how does a single name stitch together all of post-Diluvian humanity?
Well, to understand that, we have to look at where the name comes from and who carried it first. Hovhannes is derived from the Hebrew Yohanan, which translates to God is gracious or Yahweh is merciful.
Okay, so it has this deeply theological root.
Exactly. Now look at the most famous bearer of that name in antiquity, Hovhannes McCurtich. We know him in the West as John the Baptist. He is the fulcrum.
I can see him as an important figure, obviously, but a fulcrum bridging two entire cultural lineages. How does that actually work mechanically?
So think about his lineage. From the perspective of the House of Shem representing Judaism, John is the ultimate insider, right?
Right, he's basically royalty there.
Yeah. He is a priest from the line of Aaron. He is the last great Hebrew prophet, standing in the wilderness, calling for a return to the core understanding of life through repentance. So he represents the culmination of the Shemitic spiritual inheritance.
Okay, so he's the final chapter of that specific book, but then there's this pivot to the House of Japheth.
And specifically to Armenia, which historically becomes the first nation to officially embrace Christianity as a state religion.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so for the line of Japheth, John the Baptist isn't the end of an era at all. He is the conduit of a completely new spiritual inheritance. When he baptizes in the Jordan River, it's viewed by early theologians as the exact moment the inheritance passes from a localized bloodline to a universal faith.
So it's like a baton pass.
Yeah.
Like a relay race where Shem runs the first leg and Japheth runs the second, and the baton itself is Hovhannes.
That is a brilliant way to picture it, yeah. In Armenian tradition, the name Hovhannes becomes synonymous with holiness itself because it represents that exact baton pass. The foundational theology of both peoples hinges on that identical concept of grace and mercy.
So if this kinship between these two ancient houses is so deeply woven into something as fundamental as names, did it, bleed into how they identified each other in everyday life?
It absolutely did. And this is where the linguistic codes get even more explicit. Let's examine the classical Armenian term for a Jew, which is Yahudi.
I spent a lot of time looking at this breakdown in the research, and I gotta say, it feels less like a word and more like a mathematical formula.
Yes. It acts as a literal linguistic codex. The early Armenians, they didn't filter the name of their neighbors through Greek or Latin translations. They kept the ancient, raw, unvarnished Semitic sound of the divine name.
Which is huge historically.
Right. So Yahu preserves the direct sound of the Tetragrammaton, and then the suffix D in Armenian simply means belonging to.
So the ones who belong to Yahu. But I read something about the phonetic mapping of Yahoveh being an actual diagram of reality. And I'm just wondering, how does a spoken word act as a diagram?
Well, by understanding that ancient languages were often phonetic maps of physical and spiritual phenomena, let's break down the sounds of Yahweh.
Okay, let's do it.
The Ya is considered the point of origin. It is the phonetic representation of the seed, the ungraspable beginning of all things.
Like the initial spark.
Yes, exactly. Then comes the Ho. That really heavy H sound represents the divine breath of conscious life. It's the breath that takes the seed of Yah and gives it dimension, pushing it outward.
Right, manifesting it. And then the final piece, the V.
The V sound, much like the Hebrew letter Vav, literally represents a vertical line. It is the connector. It signifies the descent of the divine down into creation and the ascent of human action reaching back up to the source.
Okay, so if I'm picturing this diagram, the Yah is the initial spark in the ground. The Ho is the breath blowing on that spark to create a roaring fire. And the V is the pillar of smoke connecting that fire on the earth all the way up into the sky.
That is the exact image the ancient phonetics are meant to evoke.
That's incredible.
It really is, and it reveals a rather poignant tragedy when we look back at the word Yahudi.
Oh, because they have the spark in the breath, the Yah and the Hu, but they're missing the V.
They are missing the vertical connector, yeah. The Armenian language preserved the Yahu in naming their neighbors, recognizing that the Jewish people held the profound essence and the breath of the original covenant.
But for the Armenian Christians, the Ve, that vertical line connecting heaven and earth, is the cross.
Exactly. So the very word they use to describe their brothers acknowledges the sacred truth they hold, while subtly pointing out the missing link meant to finally unite them.
Wow. It just makes you wonder how many ancient feuds could be resolved if people just understood the etymology of the words they use. But this phonetic mapping isn't isolated to just that one concept, is it?
No, not at all.
Because this idea of sounds being literal maps of reality gets even crazier when we look at the phonetic roots connected to Egypt and the island of Cyprus. There's a hieroglyphic reading for Cyprus, which is AISSIA.
AISSIA is a profound example of how geography, phonetics, and theology were completely intertwined in the ancient mind. If you read the Egyptian hieroglyphs right to left, it gives us a literal map of human consciousness navigating the flow of time.
Okay, let's walk through that map for the listener. The first part is the double reads, right? Making the AI sound.
Yeah, a diphthong, which represents a liminal threshold. Think of it as a bridge between the A of birth and the I of death. It is the phonetic equivalent of stepping off the riverbank and into the water, the initiation.
Okay. Then the middle hieroglyph shows walking legs paired with drumsticks, making this elongated SSS sound.
Right. The SSS is the flow. It's the sound of moving water, the rhythmic passage of breath, the continuous spiral of cyclic time. It's the journey of life itself carrying you across those waters.
And then you finally arrive at the last glyph, a single reed making the IA sound.
The IA represents the solidified individual I am. It is the singular consciousness that finally emerges, fully formed, and stands on solid ground after enduring the flow.
So AI, SSS, IA.
Okay.
You step onto the threshold, you endure the chaotic flow of time, and you arrive at your true solidified self. And this entire phonetic formula was just the ancient name for Cyprus. I mean, I've got to push back on this a little. I'm having a hard time buying that an entire island was named just to act as a phonetic metaphor. Wasn't it just called Cyprus because it was a huge hub for copper mining, and all this spiritual stuff was retrofitted later?
It's completely understandable to view it that way from our modern perspective. Because today, we separate industry from theology. We have mining over here and religion way over there.
Right, they don't really mix today.
But to the ancient mind, there was no separation. Mining was a deeply spiritual, almost magical process. You're taking hidden raw material from the earth and transforming it through fire.
Oh, I see.
That physical transformation was seen as a literal mirror for human spiritual transformation, which brings us to the root of the word Cyprus itself, which is KPR.
The trilateral root, KPR. Okay, how does that connect the physical copper of the island to the spiritual flow of Asia?
Well, in ancient Egyptian, Kepher is the scarab beetle. The scarab rolls its ball of dung across the earth, pushing life out of decay, which the ancients saw as a direct symbol of the sun rolling across the sky. It represents rebirth, coming into being.
And simultaneously, across the Mediterranean, you have the Kabiri.
Exactly.
The Kabiri were the 7 ancient gods of transformation, right? The ones worshipped in those island mystery cults.
Yes. And KPR is the phonetic foundation of all of this, including the Greek word for Cyprus, Kypros. KPR isn't just a label for copper, it's the phonetic sound of transformation itself.
So it's the action.
Right. It is the actual process that happens while you are in the SSS, the flow of life. Cyprus, with its intense geological activity, was viewed as the geographical embodiment where the threshold meets the flow and the becoming produces the true self.
So if KPR is this phonetic code for becoming, how does that actually translate into the physical dirt and rock of the island? The sources break this down into three kingdoms: mineral, vegetable, and animal.
Yes, the alchemical process.
Let's start with the mineral and vegetable, because this is where metallurgy literally becomes theology.
So, in the extreme Mediterranean climate of Cyprus, there are massive deposits of copper sulfide ore. And left exposed to the relentless sun and air, that dark, raw ore undergoes a natural, very slow transformation into brilliant blue-green copper sulfate.
Which is known as alum.
Or vitriol, yes. And this naturally occurring alum is a mordant, a fixative.
Okay, let's pause and give an ELI 5 on why a fixative matters. Why would ancient priests care so much about boiling copper into a fixative?
Because of the dye industry. In the ancient world, if you wanted to dye an animal wool tunic using beautiful vegetable dyes like deep red madder root or blue woad, you couldn't just mash the plants onto the fabric.
Right, it would just wash out.
Exactly. The color would vanish the first time it rained. You needed a chemical agent to force the vegetable dye to permanently bond with the animal fiber. The mineral transformation into alum enables all other transformations. It literally fixes the true color into the fabric so it can never be washed away.
Oh, wow. Okay, so I see the metaphor now. If we don't have a fixative, our life experiences, the joys, the traumas, the lessons, they just wash away like cheap dye in a tunic.
Yes.
We remain a blank slate. We actually need the heat and the intense pressure of life to act as that alchemical fixative, locking our true colors into our souls.
That is the alchemy of the soul. The mineral transforms so the vegetable can marry the animal, which brings us to the animal kingdom and the guardians of this entire process. The ancient texts frequently mention two figures here, the Egyptian dwarf god Bes and the Greek god Hephaestus.
Okay, so Bes was the protector of the vulnerable, right? Particularly women in childbirth, and a guardian of the threshold. And Hephaestus is the god of the forge.
Right. Hephaestus works in fire and metal. He is the divine architect of the intense heat required for KPR, the becoming. And Bes guards the raw vulnerability of the soul as it enters that fire.
So you need both.
Together, they represent the necessary conditions for this alchemical change. You need the intense heat of the forge, but you also need divine protection so you aren't completely destroyed by the flames.
But the research hints that this profound understanding of KPR, this sacred cycle of becoming, it got corrupted later on in history, didn't it?
Sadly, it did. As we move later into the Greek era, the sacred KPR trilateral gets distorted. The Greeks took the circular O, representing the sacred, unbroken cycle of becoming, and they dissected it with a harsh vertical line to create the letter phi.
Wait, didn't we just say the vertical line was a good thing? Like the V in Yahovah connecting heaven and earth?
Well, context is everything. In Yahovah, the vertical line is a bridge. In the corrupted Greek usage, it acts as a scalpel. They used it to divide the sacred circle. They turned the profound mystery of Kabiri's transformation into what the texts call a cabaret.
A cabaret, literally like a sideshow.
Exactly. They turned the unified process of spiritual metallurgy into a dichotomy, a performance of separation rather than a crucible of unity. They lost the understanding that the meaning of life isn't resting in the static state.
Right.
The meaning of life is the becoming, thrice the mineral, the vegetable, the animal, all elevating the human spirit.
Okay, so if our souls are basically going through this intense alchemical pressure cooker to fix our true colors, how did ancient people actually endure that process? I mean, did they have physical tools or practices to keep them anchored in that terrifying flow of becoming? Because just knowing the phonetics doesn't make the fire any less hot.
That's a great point. And they absolutely had tools, and they built them directly into the earth. To understand how they anchored themselves, we have to transition from the chemistry of rocks to the physics of sound. We have to look at the Avazan Chapel at Gegard Monastery in Armenia.
Oh, Avazan, which translates to pool or basin. I'm looking at photos of this place, and it's not a building sitting on a hill. It is a chapel carved directly out of the interior of a solid cliff face, complete with a natural sacred spring flowing inside it.
It is an architectural marvel. But what makes Avazan truly extraordinary isn't just the stone carving, it's the acoustic engineering. The interior chambers were deliberately shaped by the monks to act as a massive natural sound box.
I've heard it's famous for choir performances today, but I'm trying to picture the original intent. Did they carve deep into a mountain just to get good reverb?
Not just any reverb, no. The architecture was specifically tuned to amplify a very particular musical system called the Octoechos. These are the 8 modes of musical ascent and descent used in ancient Armenian hymns.
Okay, but how does singing in 8 modes help a person endure the alchemical fire of becoming?
Because the music itself is a map of the KPR process. These chants aren't just pretty melodies to pass the time, they are sonic architecture. And to navigate this complex system, the medieval Armenians developed a unique musical shorthand called Khaz notation.
The Khaz notation is wild. It's not like modern sheet music where one note on a staff equals one strike of a piano key. One single Khaz symbol could hold an entire sequence of vocal inflections, pitches, and rhythms. It's almost like a zip file of audio data.
Yes.
You just have to know the password to unzip it in real time while you're singing.
A zip file of audio is the perfect way to describe it. It was an incredibly dense codex of sound that held the precise frequencies needed to tune the human body to the sacred flow. But tragically, the password to unzip that knowledge was lost for centuries.
Yeah, the history behind how it was recovered is heartbreaking. I read about Komitas, this brilliant Armenian priest and musicologist. He spent 20 years in the late 19th and early 20th centuries traveling, listening to peasants sing, and mathematically cracking the code of the ancient cause.
He was an absolute genius who successfully decoded the zip file. But during the horrific events of the 1915 Armenian genocide, Komitas was arrested and deported. The trauma caused a severe mental breakdown. He spent the rest of his life in psychiatric hospitals, and his life's work, the key to the cause, was largely lost in the chaos.
It's just a massive cultural wound. But the story doesn't end there, does it?
Miraculously, no. In the 1980s, an Armenian composer named Arthur Shah Nazarian dedicated his life to rediscovering Komitas' scattered archives. Through painstaking work, he recovered the keys to the cause system, suddenly unlocking thousands of ancient manuscripts that had been silent for generations.
Wow. So we have the keys back.
Yep.
And when we look at the music they were singing in the Avazan Chapel, we have those 8 modes. But the research talks about a progression. The singers move through the 8, but they're aiming for a 9th, and then they stabilize on a 10th. Can you give me an ELI 5 on this cosmic musical math?
Sure. So think of a modern musical scale. You have an octave, right? 8 notes that complete a cycle. In this ancient system, the 8 modes represent the totality of earthly time. It's the full cyclical experience of the created physical world, the SSS flow we talked about earlier.
Okay, so 8 is the physical world. What is the 9?
By ascending perfectly through the physical vibrations of the 8 modes, the choir aims to pry open a doorway to the 9. In Armenian, the word for 9 is in. The 9 is not a musical mode at all. It is the transcendent nth dimension.
The nth dimension. So it's not a sound.
No, it is the profound, charged silence beyond the music. It's the unmanifested realm from which all sacred sound emerges. If the 8 modes are the rungs of a ladder, the 9 is the act of stepping off the top of the ladder into the sky.
Oh, man. And the 10, das.
Das translates to class, order, or measure. Think about the number 10. It is the first number that mathematically returns to unity 1 plus 0 equals 1. The 10 is the ultimate cosmic measure. It's the container that securely holds the entire system, the earthly chaos of the 8 and the heavenly silence of the 9 in perfect sacred order.
This brings up a massive question for me. If this chapel was tuned to these frequencies and these modes represent the journey of the soul, how long have humans been trying to hit this perfect resonance?
The linguistic and anthropological timelines trace the roots of this specific frequency back roughly 7,000 years. The sources draw a fascinating line connecting the sonic tradition all the way back to figures like Utnapishtim.
Utnapishtim, the Mesopotamian Noah, right? The guy who survived the Great Flood in the Epic of Gilgamesh.
Yes. The implication is that this humming frequency, this phonetic and acoustic knowledge of how to navigate the terrifying flow of existence, is the ultimate survival tool. It is the frequency that literally survived the flood of forgetting. When a choir stands inside the Avazan Chapel today, surrounded by solid rock, singing those recovered ancient hymns, they aren't just performing. The cliff face itself is acting as an amplifier for a 7,000-year-old frequency.
It's almost too much to take in. We've gone on an incredible journey today. We started with the idea of a torn humanity and saw how the shared root of a name Hovhannes acts as a bridge uniting the ancient houses of Japheth and Shem. We decoded the phonetic maps of Yahoveh and the Egyptian glyphs for Cyprus, showing that words aren't just labels, they're diagrams of our spiritual reality.
We saw how the alchemy of copper and dye isn't just ancient chemistry, but a profound metaphor for how the intense heat of life fixes our true colors. And finally, we saw how the physical architecture of the Avazan Chapel was carved to amplify the musical codes that help us endure that very alchemical fire.
So this deep dive, it wasn't just to hand you an overwhelming history lesson. It's a new lens for how you view your own life. The next time you feel stuck, static, or just lost in the chaos, remember the Egyptian glyphs and the alchemy of Cyprus. You are not meant to just sit still in a state of being. You are currently in the SSS, the turbulent flow. You are undergoing KPR, the necessary, painful, beautiful process of becoming.
You are being refined. The heat is just the forge doing its work.
We've seen how the Armenian word for Jew, Yahudi, unknowingly preserved a sacred divine sound for centuries, keeping an ancient spark alive. It really makes you wonder, what ancient forgotten truths are you currently preserving in the everyday words you use, the names in your own family tree, or the melodies you absent-mindedly hum? What if your own voice is carrying a 7,000-year-old frequency, just waiting for you to finally decode it?